Nico Steves here. Today's podcast includes a poem, Our Lady of Consolation, plus another journal entry from Canalville, the same village that's in my book, The Very Fine Light. Before the podcast continues, if you've not already added a comment or star rating for my book, The Very Fine Light, at Amazon.com, once you've completed reading the book, please do. And then go to NicoSteves.com and get on the new mailing list. That's NICOSSTEVES.com. Here is something that came to my attention the other day. It's a journal entry from a villager in Canalville that never made it in the Canalville newspaper, nor my book, The Very Fine Light. It's an example of things that happen in and around Canalville, I guess you'd say. Anyway, here it is, directly from the journal itself. And I'm quoting from the journal. Quote, "Have you ever spent any time volunteering to ride in a police car? Well, I did spend one evening during my college years riding around in one, and to date, I hope it remains that way. Because outside of someone being arrested for some reason, there is really no point nor reason for spending any time with the police as far as I'm concerned. But one of my classes while in college in West Paris, which is a pretty big city for those of you unfamiliar with it, gave us the opportunity to spend a night driving around with a police officer on the night beat. At the time, relations with police were pretty bad, sort of like today. I had heard of this novel way for the police to give the public a chance to get a taste of life from the police officer's side of the windshield. Sort of a community policing effort, I think. Anyways, one of my professors, actually there were two that semester, who challenged us students to take the city up on their offer. So if you took on the challenge, it counted for some extra credit points or something, and while I don't like to admit it, I really needed some extra points for their courses. And so I figured, what the heck, and volunteered to take them up on the deal. Well, I learned there was quite a bit of advanced paperwork that had to be filled out for legal reasons. I remember thinking twice when one thick document that I had to sign was a disclaimer or a waiver of responsibility to the city should something happen to me while out on patrol. I remember thinking, sounds a bit ominous. Perhaps it's just some scare tactic, a bit of exaggeration for dramatic effect. If my parents had known that I was planning to do this, well, there is no question in my mind they would never have allowed me to sign such a document, nor consider the evening ride in a patrol car in the first place. But they were back in Canalville, not the big city like me, so what the hey. Some classmates and roommates told me I was crazy for considering this, but I figured they were just jealous that they hadn't volunteered, and it did raise my street cred, especially with my professors, and admittedly several of the more studious co-eds who would never give me the time of day before this volunteering bit. 2 weeks later, I made my way down to the police station. Actually, they have a jail in this building as well. I had to be there around 4 p.m., as I recall, and it was near the end of the spring semester. The late afternoon was bright and sunny. Most of my mates would be tossing frisbees, drinking beer, and meeting co-eds in the process, but not me. The first thing I remember after arriving was the number of people, family members mostly, going in between the jailhouse and several bail bonds companies on the other side of the street. I remember thinking that I had never really noticed how run-down and dingy these storefronts looked whenever I drove past. But before I knew it, I was up at the front desk with the stone-faced desk sergeant, who was doing his best to keep his gaze as neutral as possible. As I came up to him, my hair a bit disheveled, wearing old blue jeans and a yellow Western-style shirt, I could tell he was giving me the once-over. Made me feel a bit creepy, but I guess that's part of their job around here, figuring out who was a threat and who was just some nobody, or some somebody. So I just shrugged it off best I could. He asked me how he could help, and I squeaked out that I was going on a patrol car ride, putting down the folder with the disclaimer and other paperwork documentation, including questions about any issues I may have had with the law. He perused it, occasionally looking up at me and checking out the fairly busy lobby at the same time. "So you're going out on patrol tonight, eh?" he said, cracking a bit of a small smile. "Yes, sir," I said quietly, not sure if his smile was sly or welcoming. Never really being around police officers, I started to wonder about the wisdom of choosing to do this in the first place. However, he soon raised his hand and waved me into what I'll call the inner sanctum, the room behind the curtain that I had never been behind before, nor since. But I'd seen my share of detective shows, so I wasn't surprised by the faded green walls and harsh fluorescent lighting. Well, as I was getting acclimated to the environment, I was introduced to the captain of the shift, and he quickly introduced me to his evening team. Would these be the men and women who would be patrolling along with me, or rather, I would be patrolling with? Then I got introduced to my assigned police officer. I do not remember his name. He was on the younger side of middle-aged and about 6'2", all dressed in blue, and as these were days before Kevlar vests, he just looked kinda bulked up. He had the revolver and handcuffs and all that stuff. He was reasonably conversational, although I basically shadowed him around the precinct as he gathered materials for the evening shift. After a cup of joe with the captain, I drank mine black even though I prefer cream and sugar, well, then we headed out around 5 p.m. for the 8-hour shift that I had signed up for. My thought process began to change as we neared the outside, and my officer reminded me about the basic safety protocols. I was to stay in the car unless he told me it was okay to get out. I couldn't take pictures or anything like that, and then he handed me a paper with several paragraphs on it. As I read them, they once again were a disclaimer that there could be issues that night, and though unlikely, I was to take total responsibility for myself should I be injured, including dying during my ride with the officers. Injuries occurred. Dying. Now my mind began to race. What in the world? What had I gotten myself into? Here, all I wanted was a few measly points for my college courses, not to risk my life in order to make the grade. As we reached the car, one of those big black four-doors, I suddenly wanted to test to see just how secure the iron bars were that kept prisoners in back while I would be sitting in front just ahead of them. Yikes, I wondered if some wild person would be sitting behind me and trying to strangle me as we drove. What if there was a shootout? I didn't have any sort of protection. "Get in," the officer said with a bit of a look that seemed like a wry smile. I began to regret the idea of going for this drive. We headed out into the night, through the downtown business district first, cruising several streets with local dive bars that facilitated city office workers who would stop for a quick one before heading home. If we're lucky, none of those guys will drive too badly as they leave for home. I remained very tense for the first hour or so, thinking about the fact that maybe I wouldn't make it home. I never thought of that before, but it was top of mind at this point. "We eat a late lunch, so be prepared," said my officer. "No worries," I said. My speech was a bit clipped. Actually, eating was the last thing on my mind. After a while, things got interesting, and I relaxed quite a lot. I liked it as we pulled a few cars and trucks over for various minor traffic infractions, even one fender bender, and then we got a call to get to an accident site. As we blasted down the street with sirens wailing, my mind raced once again, especially as we sped past and through several red lights. That was pretty cool. But when we arrived, all the traffic was moving along just fine. No car around. Everyone must have left, or maybe a false alarm. Anyways, nothing ever happened at that spot. Our next patrol location was a run-down part of town to check the local night spots there. As the time passed while we cruised, I found it both exciting and boring at the same time, the tedium of being in that patrol car just driving around. And then we raced to a fire alarm, but we were just the backup team. We'd been out for quite a while when my officer said, "Lunchtime," and we proceeded to a fast food joint. He picked up his meal. I got mine. As we got our burgers, I checked my watch. It was 9:30, and we'd been running around quite a lot. He parked in the side parking lot of a run-down city school. It was dark and eerily quiet and sort of remote. However, we did have a clear view of two run-down apartment buildings, and there was lots of activity between the two, but no drama, mainly a few guys who were apparently part of the local gang. As we sat and ate our burgers, I remember the officer saying to me, "See, this is just a typical night. No real drama." "So I see," I said, but I couldn't help wondering if he would change his tune should a big crime occur on his watch. I thought about this as I ate cold fries that came in the bag with the burgers and sodas. For whatever reason, that's what I remember most vividly of that evening, sitting in the parking lot of a run-down old city school and watching the goings-on across the street. Generally, all through the night, I had a feeling of dread that something real could happen and maybe I would get hit or, well. After the patrol, I got in my car and drove away. That experience sort of changed my outlook because, in part, that night patrol was a little too real for me. Nothing like that feeling happened before and almost never since, save for 2 other times during my adult life. Now, those, dear journal, will have to wait for another time. Unquote. And now on to part 2 of Constant Procession. And now for Apparitions and Shrines of the Virgin Mary, a poem, Our Lady of Consolation. Ave Maria, at thy feet, oft have I knelt, my bliss complete, unmindful of all else besides, since thy pure arms were open wide. Ave Maria, let it be my sole delight to honor thee. My heart was full of love, and through strong tendrils as young grapevines do, earth forced them rudely all apart, and left a torn and bleeding heart. Ave Maria, I appealed to thee, to every wound was healed. I loved all beauty, but I saw beauty was subject to the law of death, decay, the law of earth, and beauty grew as nothing worth. Ave Maria, then I turned to thee, and fadeless beauty learned. I loved the truth, but always found falsehood did more than truth abound. My heart grew chill, I came and knelt, thy truth unswerving here I felt. O Mary Mother, then thy child was by thy justice reconciled. I yearned for science. Everywhere earth's answer was an empty air, a mocking sound of vain pretense, whose din and folly drove me thence. I fled, sweet Mary, to thy shrine, and learned a science all divine. Fame called to me with clarion voice, and held her laurels for my choice. I turned, heart-sickened, for I knew the thorns amid her bays she threw. Ave Maria, then 'twas sweet to burn fresh incense at thy feet. Then let me ne'er unmindful be of all in joy I owe to thee. By the very Reverend Edvin Soren. The Very Fine Light is available on Amazon.com. Please feel free to contact me at nicosteves.com. That's Nikos Steves, Steves.com. If you like this episode, and for more, share them with friends, and consider William J. Walsh's book, Heaven's Bright Queen, Apparitions and Shrines of Heaven's Bright Queen. Well, this is Nico Steves. Thank you. See you next time.